So to get to the moon, did the Mercury, Gemini missions to get practice in space. Apollo went to the moon. Apollo 11 in July of 1969, first humans to land on the moon. Okay, Apollo 11 was really a test mission right here, and was designed to go to the moon and land. There was another mission that was really one of the first actual real missions. Apollo 12 was a science mission, and then later missions, Apollo 13 was going to be the serious science mission. So Apollo 12 landed actually within walking distance of a Surveyor spacecraft, Surveyor 3, that had been there on the surface of the moon for several years. And so one of the experiments here was to actually bring back, to take some bolt cutters and cut off some parts of Apollo 3, bring back to Earth to see what it was like on the surface of the moon. How does being extended period on the surface of the moon affect human artifacts? How does being in space affect human things? Because nothing that we'd sent up there, we'd brought back that had been in space for more than a couple weeks. And so we wanted to know, well, what was an extended period of this harsh radiation environment do? And so what they did was they brought back some things. And this is where an interesting thing was. They actually discovered an organism in the camera of the Surveyor 3, Streptococcus. Spores of Streptococcus. Apparently was contaminated by one of the workers assembling it. So again, Streptococcus is a common bacteria on Earth. Causes diseases on Earth, strep throat, for example. And so so what happened was it got, they infected it. Now the strange thing is it was viable. So this bacteria, in the presence of zero atmosphere and water, extreme heat, extreme cold, harsh radiation, became spores. But when they brought it, and it survived all this harsh environment for an extended period of time, and when they came back to Earth, it was still viable. It was still able to grow and live. And so that suggests that organisms, simple organisms like bacteria, might be able to survive the trip from planet to planet. Now, remember we talked about tektites, chunks of things that can be thrown upwards from the surface of the Earth in an impact? Well, we've actually found some rocks, some moon rocks on Earth knocked loose by impacts there, and even Mars rocks. So if you get a rock that's knocked loose, if it goes from one planet to the other and takes only a few years to get there, it's actually possible that an organism might survive. When the Columbia burned up on re-entry over Texas, there were a couple of experiments on board, microorganism experiments, and one of them actually still had bacteria that were alive even after the destruction of the spacecraft when it burned up. And so this leads rise to the idea of panspermia, that possibly life can form on one planet and then be transferred to another through these impact events. So we'll talk about that maybe at the end of the semester. So the last missions to the moon featured a battery-powered rover that would actually run across the lunar surface and allow them to go beyond walking distance. The very last mission to the moon, Apollo 17, even had a geologist, Harrison Schmitt. Now, all the rest of these were just test pilots. Well, I shouldn't say just test pilots. Many of them had advanced degrees. But they were test pilots, and their degrees were more in engineering and avionics and aeronautics, not geology. So Harrison Schmitt was a geologist, an actual scientist. And so he collected some of the most impressive samples because he knew, when he saw stuff, hey, that doesn't belong there. And so he brought back some samples. Again, this picture here is from a later mission right there. And so So Apollo program ended after 17, but they had 3 more rockets for Apollo 18, 19, and 20 they never launched. So one of these rockets, actually they took the 3rd stage of it and converted it into Skylab. Skylab was our first Skylab was our very first space station. And so Skylab was launched. It was part of a Saturn V. The other 2 became, basically static displays for NASA. So you had the one of them at Johnson Space Center and one at Kennedy Space Center. This is an old picture here at the Johnson Space Center. It's not sitting out in the open anymore. Now it's actually inside a big structure, and so that's one of our students there, at one of our TCC students on a field trip, and she wanted to have her picture taken in front of the Saturn V right there, and laying on its side. There's some of our other TCC students right here. Yeah, I know they're all dressed alike. There's a reason for that. They were part of a team that was going down there. And they're standing by the main engines at the bottom end of this rocket. The rocket itself is enormous. So this thing is almost as tall as a football field is long. And so those are the main engines right there. After Apollo 11, the Soviets launched a few more unmanned missions, including some that brought samples back from the surface of the moon. And then they launched a handful of more after Apollo 17. Luna 24 is the last one. Apollo 17 was 1972. After only 4 more years, then the Soviets stopped as well. They said, well, Americans have stopped going to the moon, we're going to stop too. So that ended exploration of the moon for a long time until eventually we went back.